Tonight, the boundaries between earth and sky dissolve like morning mist over the great lake of Texcoco. Feel the air filled with the whisper of countless feathers, each one carrying the soul of a bird and the dreams of artisans who touch the divine through their craft. If this journey stirs your spirit, join us again and whisper from where you listen to us. Now, let the light fade gently. Breathe deeply. Let us dream with memories woven from quetzal plumes and golden threads. I walk through the narrow streets of Amantla, the feather workers' quarter of great Tenochtitlan, where the morning air shimmers with particles of down and the soft rustle of precious plumes being sorted by master craftsmen. Here, in this sacred neighborhood, the Amantica live and work in harmony with rhythms older than memory, their skilled hands transforming the gifts of sky-dwelling creatures into objects that bridge the mortal and divine realms. The scent of copal incense mingles with the earthy smell of cotton backing and the faint metallic tang of gold thread as I pass workshop after workshop, where families have practiced their art for generations. Through open doorways, I glimpse artisans bent over their work, their movements precise and reverent, as they select individual feathers from carefully organized collections that represent the wealth of an empire stretching from ocean to ocean. Each feather tells a story of distant lands and dangerous journeys. The brilliant green plumes of the quetzal bird have traveled hundreds of miles from the cloud forests of Guatemala, carried by Pochteca merchants who risked their lives to bring these treasures to the capital. The scarlet feathers of the macaw speak of tropical lowlands where these magnificent birds soar above jungle canopies, their voices echoing across valleys that few from Tenochtitlan will ever see. The Yamanteca themselves form a distinct social class, neither noble nor common, but occupying a unique position in Aztec society that reflects the sacred nature of their craft. They live in extended family compounds where knowledge passes from grandmother to granddaughter, from master to apprentice, in an unbroken chain of wisdom that connects each generation to the divine forces that govern the movement of birds across the sky. I pause outside a workshop where an elderly master examines a collection of hummingbird feathers, each one no larger than a fingernail, yet containing within its iridescent surface all the colors of the rainbow. His weathered hands move with the delicacy of a priest handling sacred relics, for indeed these feathers are holy objects, gifts from Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god, who guides the sun across the heavens each day. The tools of the feather worker are simple yet precise: bone needles for piercing, obsidian blades for cutting, small pots of plant-based adhesives, and cotton thread spun so fine it becomes nearly invisible when woven through the barbules of a feather. Yet in the hands of a master Amanteca, these humble implements become instruments of transformation, capable of creating art that rivals the work of the gods themselves. The workshop floors are covered with reed mats where apprentices sit in careful rows, learning to sort feathers by size, color, and quality. The youngest children, barely old enough to hold a feather without crushing it, practice the fundamental skill of recognizing the subtle differences between plumes that might appear identical to untrained eyes. This education begins in earliest childhood and continues throughout life, for the art of featherworking demands not just technical skill, but spiritual sensitivity to the essence of each bird's plumage becomes part of the sacred work. The sound of the city beyond these workshops fades into background murmur as I become absorbed in watching the intricate process of creation. Here, time moves differently. measured not by the passage of hours, but by the completion of individual feathers, the gradual emergence of patterns, the slow transformation of raw materials into objects of transcendent beauty. The Amanteca work in silence, broken only by occasional whispered consultations between master and student, for their craft requires concentration so complete that even casual conversation might disturb the delicate balance between intention and execution. Each feather must be placed with absolute precision, its angle and position calculated to catch light in exactly the right way, to contribute its unique voice to the visual symphony being created. As morning progresses toward midday, the quality of light streaming through the workshop doorways changes, and I watch as the featherworkers adjust their positions to take advantage of the shifting illumination. They understand that their art exists in constant dialogue with light itself, that the true beauty of their creations can only be appreciated when viewed under conditions that allow each feather to reveal its hidden fire.
The hierarchy within the featherworking community reflects the complexity of their art and the varying degrees of skill required for different types of work. At the bottom are the apprentices who spend years learning to prepare feathers, cleaning them, sorting them, and understanding their individual characteristics. Above them are the journeymen who can execute basic designs under supervision, their hands steady enough to work with common feathers, but not yet trusted with the most precious quetzal plumes. At the apex of this hierarchy stand the master Amanteca, individuals whose skill has been refined over decades of practice and whose spiritual connection to their craft allows them to work with the rarest and most sacred materials. These masters are consulted not only for their technical expertise, but for their ability to interpret the symbolic meanings of different feather combinations and to ensure that each piece they create serves its proper ritual and ceremonial function. The social organization of Amantitla reflects the communal nature of featherworking, with extended families often specializing in particular aspects of the craft. One family might be renowned for their skill in working with hummingbird feathers, while another has developed expertise in the complex techniques required to create the massive headdresses worn by nobles and priests during the most important ceremonies. The economic importance of the featherworkers extends far beyond their neighborhood, for their creations serve as symbols of imperial power and divine authority throughout the Aztec realm. The tribute lists that record the wealth flowing into Tenochtitlan from conquered territories include vast quantities of feathers, reflecting the enormous demand for these materials and the central role that featherwork plays in maintaining the visual splendor that reinforces Aztec dominance. The spiritual dimension of featherworking permeates every aspect of the craft, from the initial selection of materials to the final blessing of completed pieces. The Amanteca understand that they are not merely creating decorative objects, but participating in a sacred dialogue between earth and sky, between human creativity and divine inspiration. Each feather carries within it the essence of flight, the freedom of the sky, and the connection between the terrestrial and celestial realms.
The morning sun climbs higher over the great lake as I enter the workshop of Aitzel, a master Amanteca whose hands have been blessed by the gods with the ability to work with the most sacred quetzal feathers. Her fingers, stained permanently green from years of handling these precious plumes, move with the precision of a surgeon and the reverence of a priest as she selects each feather for the ceremonial shield she is creating for the temple of Quetzalcoatl. I watch in fascination as she examines a single quetzal tail feather, holding it up to catch the light streaming through the workshop's carefully positioned opening.
The feather seems to glow from within, its emerald surface shifting through dozens of subtle variations as she rotates it slowly between her fingers. This is not merely a decorative element, but a fragment of divinity. For the Quetzal bird is sacred to the feathered serpent god, and its plumes carry the power to connect the earthly realm with the celestial sphere. The preparation of each feather requires rituals that have been passed down through countless generations of Amenteca. Before Itzel can even touch the Quetzal plumes, she must purify herself through fasting and prayer, burning copal incense to cleanse her spirit and ensure that her intentions remain pure throughout the creative process. The feathers themselves are blessed by priests before being delivered to the workshop, their sacred nature acknowledged through ceremonies that honor both the birds that provided them and the gods who govern their flight. The technical challenges of working with Quetzal feathers are immense, for these delicate plumes can be damaged by the slightest mishandling. Each feather must be cleaned with brushes made from the finest rabbit hair, removing any dust or debris without disturbing the microscopic barbules that give the plume its lustrous appearance. The natural oils from human skin can permanently damage the feather's iridescent quality, so Itzel works with bone tools that have been polished smooth and blessed with protective charms. The adhesive used to attach the feathers to their cotton backing is prepared according to ancient formulas that combine plant resins with powdered jade and gold dust. This mixture not only provides the necessary bonding strength, but also imbues the finished work with additional spiritual power. For jade represents the precious water of life, while gold symbolizes the eternal light of the sun. The preparation of this adhesive is itself a sacred act, performed only during certain phases of the moon and accompanied by specific prayers and offerings.
As I observe Itzel's work, I begin to understand the profound mathematical precision required for successful feather work. Each plume must be positioned at exactly the right angle to create the desired visual effect, with the natural curve of the feather following geometric patterns that mirror the movement of celestial bodies across the sky. The spacing between feathers follow ratios that reflect the sacred numbers embedded in Aztec cosmology, creating harmonies that resonate with the fundamental structures of the universe. The color gradations achieved through careful feather selection create effects that seem to defy the laws of nature. By overlapping feathers of slightly different hues, Itzel can create the illusion of colors that exist nowhere in the natural world. Ethereal blues and greens that seem to shift and flow like water or smoke. These supernatural colors are believed to be glimpses of the divine realm, visible manifestations of the God's presence in the material world. The workshop contains hundreds of different types of feathers, each stored in specially designed containers that protect them from light, moisture, and insects. Hummingbird feathers are kept in jade boxes that preserve their iridescent quality, while the larger plumes of eagles and hawks are wrapped in cotton cloth and stored in cedar chests that have been blessed by priests. The organization of this collection reflects not only practical considerations, but also the spiritual hierarchy of the birds themselves, with the most sacred feathers occupying positions of honor within the workshop's sacred geography. The apprentices who work under Itzel's guidance spend years learning to distinguish between feathers that appear identical to untrained eyes. A master Amanteca can identify not only the species of bird from which a feather came, but also the season in which it was molted, the age of the bird, and even the specific region where it lived. This knowledge is essential for creating works that achieve the desired spiritual and aesthetic effects. For feathers from different sources carry different types of power and must be combined according to strict rules that govern their interaction. The social dynamics within the workshop reflect the sacred nature of the work being performed. Conversation is kept to a minimum, and when speech is necessary, it is conducted in whispers that will not disturb the concentration required for precise feather placement. The apprentices communicate primarily through gestures and glances, their movements choreographed through years of practice into a silent dance that supports the master's creative process.
The economic value of the materials being worked with in Itzel's shop represents wealth beyond the imagination of common people. A single Quetzal kale feather is worth more than a farmer's annual harvest, while the completed shield she is creating will be valued at the equivalent of several houses in the finest neighborhoods of Tenochtitlan. Yet the Amanteca understand that the true value of their work cannot be measured in material terms, for they are creating objects that serve as conduits between the human and divine realms. The physical demands of featherworking are considerable, requiring not only exceptional manual dexterity, but also the ability to maintain perfect concentration for hours at a time. Itzel's eyes, trained through decades of close work, can detect variations in color and texture that would be invisible to others. Her hands, strengthened through years of precise manipulation, can work with feathers so delicate that a breath of air might destroy them. Yet she maintains the steady control necessary to position each plume with mathematical precision. The spiritual preparation required for working with the most sacred feathers involves not only personal purification, but also the maintenance of proper relationships with the gods who govern the craft. Itzel makes daily offerings to Quetzalcoatl, burning precious copal and presenting gifts of jade and gold to ensure that her work continues to receive divine blessing. She also maintains shrines to the various bird spirits whose feathers she uses, acknowledging their sacrifice and asking for their continued cooperation in her sacred work. The sound of wooden paddles cutting through water reaches my ears as I make my way to the great market of Tlatelolco, where canoes laden with feathers from across the empire converge like colorful birds returning to their roost. The morning mist rises from the lake's surface, creating an ethereal backdrop for the flotilla of merchants who have traveled for weeks to bring their precious cargo to the hungry workshops of Tenochtitlan's Amanteca. I stand on the stone steps leading down to the water's edge, watching as a canoe from the tropical lowlands approaches with its cargo of scarlet macaw feathers. The merchant, his skin darkened by months of travel under the fierce sun of distant lands, carefully lifts bundles wrapped in cotton cloth that have been sealed with tree resin to protect their contents from moisture. Each bundle represents not just commercial value, but the culmination of dangerous expeditions into territories where jaguars prowl and hostile tribes guard their avian treasures jealously. The Pochteca, who bring these feathers to market, are more than simple traders. They are the empire's eyes and ears in distant lands, gathering intelligence about potential conquests while establishing the trade networks that bind the Aztec realm together. Their knowledge of bird habitats, migration patterns, and seasonal availability makes them invaluable partners to the Amanteca, who depend on their expertise to obtain the specific types and qualities of feathers required for different ceremonial purposes. A canoe from the cloud forests of the south draws my attention as it glides silently toward the dock, its precious cargo of Quetzal feathers representing wealth beyond measure. The merchant who captains this vessel has spent months in the misty highlands where these sacred birds dwell, waiting patiently for the molting season when the magnificent tail feathers can be collected without harming the creatures themselves. The penalty for killing a Quetzal is death, for these birds are sacred to Quetzalcoatl, and their lives are considered more valuable than those of common men. The organization of the feather market reflects the complex hierarchy of Aztec society and the varying degrees of sacredness attributed to different types of plumage. The most precious feathers, those of the quetzal, the roseate spoonbill, and certain rare hummingbirds, are traded in a separate section of the market where only licensed merchants and authorized amanteca are permitted to enter. Guards wearing the feathered costumes of eagle warriors patrol this sacred precinct, their presence a reminder that these materials are not mere commodities, but instruments of divine power. I observe the intricate negotiations between merchants and feather workers, conducted in the formal language of commerce that has evolved to describe the subtle qualities that determine a feather's value. Terms exist for dozens of different color variations, for the specific iridescent qualities that make certain plumes suitable for particular types of work, and for the seasonal characteristics that affect a feather's durability and spiritual potency. This specialized vocabulary represents centuries of accumulated knowledge about the properties of avian plumage and its applications in sacred art. The seasonal rhythms of the feather trade create periods of abundance and scarcity that profoundly influence the work of the amanteca. Spring brings the molting season for many species, flooding the market with fresh plumes that carry the vital energy of renewal and growth. Summer deliveries focus on the brilliant feathers of tropical birds, their intense colors reflecting the power of the sun at its zenith. Autumn brings the more subdued plumage of highland species, while winter's offerings include the pure white feathers of water birds that symbolize the cleansing power of the rains. The quality control exercised by experienced merchants is extraordinary in its precision and thoroughness. I watch as a veteran trader examines a collection of hummingbird feathers under different lighting conditions, rejecting those that show even the slightest signs of damage or fading. His trained eye can detect the difference between feathers that were naturally molted and those that were plucked from dead birds, for the former retain their spiritual potency, while the latter are considered spiritually dead and suitable only for the most mundane applications. The storage and transportation of feathers requires specialized knowledge and equipment that has been developed over generations of trial and error. Delicate plumes are packed in containers lined with soft cotton and sealed with aromatic resins that repel insects while preserving the feather's natural oils. Larger feathers are arranged in specific patterns that prevent them from crushing each other during transport, while the most valuable specimens travel in individual jade or obsidian cases that protect them from both physical damage and spiritual contamination. The economic impact of the feather trade extends far beyond the immediate participants to encompass entire regions of the empire, whose prosperity depends on their ability to supply the insatiable demand of Tenochtitlan's workshops. Tribute lists record the annual delivery of millions of feathers from conquered territories, while independent merchants supplement these official supplies with additional materials obtained through voluntary trade relationships that benefit both parties.
The social relationships formed through the feather trade create networks of obligation and mutual dependence that strengthen the bonds holding the empire together. Merchants who consistently provide high-quality materials develop long-term partnerships with specific workshops, while artisans who create exceptional works often commission merchants to seek out particular types of feathers for future projects. These relationships are sealed through elaborate ceremonies that invoke the protection of the gods and establish the spiritual as well as commercial dimensions of the partnership. The arrival of new shipments creates excitement throughout the featherworking quarter as word spreads about the quality and variety of materials now available.
Master artisans emerge from their workshops to examine the offerings personally, their experienced eyes quickly assessing which feathers will be suitable for their current projects and which should be saved for future commissions. The competition for the finest specimens can be intense, with established masters using their reputation and connections to secure priority access to the most desirable materials. The cultural exchange facilitated by the feather trade brings more than just materials to Tenochtitlan. It also carries new techniques, design motifs, and spiritual practices from distant regions. Merchants often serve as informal ambassadors of artistic innovation, describing the featherworking traditions of other peoples and sometimes bringing examples of foreign techniques that can be adapted to Aztec aesthetic preferences. This cross-cultural pollination enriches the artistic vocabulary of the Amanteca while maintaining the distinctive character that makes Aztec featherwork unique among the artistic traditions of Mesoamerica.
The afternoon light filters through the smoke holes of the most sacred workshop in all of Amantla, where Master Necali works in solitude on a commission that will adorn the very image of Quetzalcoatl himself. Here in this sanctified space, where no apprentice may enter without years of purification, the most profound mysteries of featherworking are practiced by artisans who have transcended mere craftsmanship to become vessels of divine inspiration. I am permitted to observe from the threshold, my presence tolerated only because I have undergone the ritual cleansing required of all who would witness the creation of objects destined for the gods themselves. The air within the workshop shimmers with an almost palpable sense of the sacred, heavy with copal smoke and the whispered prayers that accompany each placement of a feather upon the divine image being created. Necali moves with the deliberate grace of a priest, performing the most solemn ceremonies, his every gesture calculated to maintain the spiritual purity necessary for working with materials that bridge the gap between earth and heaven. Before touching each Quetzal feather, he purifies his hands with water blessed by the high priests of the Templo Mayor, then anoints his fingertips with precious oils that have been consecrated through elaborate rituals involving the sacrifice of quail and the burning of jade. The image taking shape under his hands represents Quetzalcoatl in his aspect as Ehecatl, the wind god, whose breath gives life to all creation. The feathers are arranged in patterns that mirror the movement of air currents, creating the illusion that the divine figure is perpetually in motion, his feathered serpent form undulating with the rhythm of the cosmic winds that carry the souls of the dead to their eternal rest. The selection of feathers for this sacred work follows principles that go far beyond mere aesthetic considerations. Each plume must be examined not only for its physical perfection, but also for its spiritual purity, determined through divination rituals that reveal whether the feather carries the blessing of the gods or has been contaminated by contact with malevolent forces. Feathers that fail these spiritual tests are rejected regardless of their beauty, for the power of the finished image depends entirely on the sacred nature of its components. The workshop itself has been consecrated through ceremonies that transform it from ordinary space into a temple where the divine presence can manifest through human artistry. The walls are painted with sacred symbols that invoke the protection of the feathered serpent, while the floor is covered with sand brought from the shores of the sacred lake where Quetzalcoatl first emerged from the waters of creation. Incense burners placed at the cardinal directions maintain a constant offering of copal smoke that carries the prayers of the artisan to the celestial realm. The tools used in this sacred work are themselves objects of power, blessed by priests and imbued with spiritual force through elaborate consecration rituals. The bone needles have been carved from the wing bones of eagles that died natural deaths,
their hollow structure allowing them to channel divine energy into the work. The obsidian blades used for cutting are knapped from volcanic glass taken from the sacred mountain where the gods first created fire. Their razor edges capable of cutting through the spiritual as well as physical dimensions of reality. The adhesive used to bind the feathers to their backing is prepared according to formulas that have been revealed through divine visions, combining tree resins with powdered jade, gold dust, and the ground bones of sacred birds. This mixture is prepared during specific astronomical alignments that ensure its spiritual potency, with each ingredient added while reciting prayers that invoke the blessing of the appropriate deities. The resulting adhesive not only provides physical bonding, but also creates spiritual connections between the individual feathers that allow them to function as a unified divine presence. The process of applying each feather follows ritual patterns that mirror the cosmic order itself. Necali begins at the center of the image, representing the axis mundi, around which all creation revolves, then works outward in spirals that follow the movement of the stars across the night sky. Each feather is positioned according to mathematical principles that reflect the sacred geometry underlying the structure of the universe, creating harmonies that resonate with the fundamental frequencies of creation. The color progressions achieved through careful feather selection create visual effects that seem to transcend the limitations of physical matter. By overlapping feathers of subtly different hues, Necali creates the illusion of colors that exist only in the divine realm, ethereal greens and blues that seem to glow with their own inner light. These supernatural colors are believed to be manifestations of the god's presence, visible proof that the divine spirit has taken residence within the material form of the image. The spiritual preparation required for this work extends far beyond the immediate purification rituals to encompass the artisan's entire way of life. Necali has spent years in training that combines technical instruction with spiritual discipline, learning not only the physical techniques of featherworking, but also the prayers, fasting practices, and meditation methods that allow him to maintain the state of consciousness necessary for creating objects of divine power.
The workshop operates according to ritual schedules that align the creative process with cosmic rhythms. Work begins each day with prayers to the rising sun and ends with offerings to the evening star. While certain phases of the moon are considered too spiritually dangerous for handling the most sacred materials. The timing of each stage of the work is determined through consultation with priest astronomers who calculate the most auspicious moments for different types of creative activity. The social isolation required for this sacred work creates a profound sense of responsibility and spiritual burden for the master artisan. Necali has voluntarily separated himself from normal human relationships to maintain the purity necessary for his calling, living in a state of perpetual ritual preparation that allows him to serve as a conduit for divine creativity. His sacrifice is recognized and honored by the entire community, for his work creates the sacred objects that maintain the spiritual health of the empire. The economic value of the work being performed in this sacred workshop is beyond calculation, for the finished image will serve not merely as decoration, but as a living presence of the god himself. The materials alone represent wealth equivalent to entire cities, while the spiritual power embodied in the completed work is considered priceless. Yet Necali works not for material reward, but for the privilege of participating in the divine creative process that maintains the cosmic order.
The late afternoon sun slants through the workshop windows as I witness the sacred ritual of color selection, where Master Tenochtitlan arranges feathers according to the ancient color codes that govern the spiritual hierarchy of the Aztec cosmos. Each hue carries specific meanings that have been passed down through generations of featherworkers, creating a visual language as complex and precise as the spoken words of priests and scribes. Before me spreads a rainbow of possibilities, each color representing different aspects of divine power and cosmic force. The brilliant green of quetzal feathers embodies the life-giving power of growing plants and the eternal renewal of spring, while the deep blue of cotinga plumes reflects the infinite depths of the sky where the gods dwell in eternal splendor. The scarlet of macaw feathers burns with the fire of the sun and the blood of sacrifice, while the pure white of heron plumes speaks of the cleansing power of rain and the purity required for communion with the divine. Xochitl's hands move with the precision of a mathematician as she sorts feathers into groups that will create the specific color harmonies required for the ceremonial cape she is designing for a high priest of Tlaloc, the rain god. The arrangement follows principles that connect earthly colors to celestial forces, ensuring that the finished garment will serve not merely as decoration, but as a functional tool for channeling divine power during the most important religious ceremonies. The symbolic significance of color combinations has been codified through centuries of religious practice and artistic tradition. Certain pairings are considered so powerful that they can only be used in objects destined for the gods themselves, while others are reserved for the regalia of the emperor and his closest advisors. The knowledge of these color codes is closely guarded, passed down only to master artisans who have proven their spiritual worthiness through years of dedicated service and ritual purification. The preparation of colored feathers involves techniques that go far beyond simple selection from natural sources. Many plumes are enhanced through careful dyeing processes that use pigments derived from insects, minerals, and plants gathered from across the empire. The cochineal insects that produce the most prized red dyes are cultivated on special cactus farms maintained by communities whose entire existence revolves around supplying this precious material to the featherworkers of Tenochtitlan.
The indigo used to deepen the blue of certain feathers comes from plants grown in the humid lowlands, where entire villages specialize in the complex fermentation processes required to extract the dye in its most potent form. The yellow pigments that transform ordinary feathers into golden flames are derived from flowers that bloom only during specific seasons, requiring careful timing and storage to ensure their availability throughout the year. The application of dyes to feathers requires extraordinary skill and patience, for the delicate structure of the plume can be easily damaged by improper handling or excessive heat. Xochitl demonstrates the technique by carefully immersing a single feather in a bath of warm dye, controlling the temperature and timing with the precision of an alchemist. The feather must be moved constantly to ensure even coverage while avoiding the agitation that might damage its microscopic barbules. The spiritual dimension of color work extends beyond mere aesthetic considerations to encompass the metaphysical properties believed to be inherent in different hues. Red feathers are thought to carry the life force of the sun and the power of blood sacrifice, making them essential components in objects designed to channel divine energy. Blue plumes embody the wisdom of the sky gods and the depth of sacred waters, while green feathers contain the regenerative power of growing plants and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The mathematical precision required for creating effective color progressions reflects the Aztec understanding of harmony as a fundamental principle of cosmic order.
Xochitl works with ratios and proportions that mirror the relationships between celestial bodies, creating visual rhythms that resonate with the underlying structure of reality itself. The spacing between different colored feathers follows patterns derived from astronomical observations, ensuring that the finished work will be in harmony with the cosmic forces it is designed to channel. The workshop contains an extensive library of color samples that document the exact hues achievable through different combinations of natural and dyed feathers. These samples are organized according to a complex classification system that takes into account not only the visual appearance of each color, but also its spiritual properties and appropriate ceremonial applications. Master artisans spend years memorizing these classifications, developing the ability to select the perfect color combination for any given purpose without conscious thought.
The seasonal availability of certain colors creates rhythms in the featherworking calendar that align the creative process with natural cycles. Spring brings the fresh greens of new growth and the delicate pastels of early flowers, while summer provides the intense reds and yellows that reflect the power of the sun at its zenith. Autumn offers the rich browns and golds of harvest time, while winter's palette focuses on the pure whites and subtle grays that symbolize the cleansing power of the rains. The psychological effects of different color combinations are well understood by master featherworkers, who use this knowledge to create objects that produce specific emotional and spiritual responses in those who view them. Certain arrangements of red and gold are designed to inspire courage and martial valor, while combinations of blue and green promote contemplation and spiritual insight. The most powerful color schemes are those that create a sense of transcendence, lifting the viewer's consciousness beyond the mundane concerns of daily life. The trade in colored feathers creates economic relationships that extend throughout the empire and beyond, connecting the workshops of Tenochtitlan to communities thousands of miles away. Tribute lists record the annual delivery of specific quantities of feathers in particular colors, while independent merchants supplement these official supplies with exotic plumes obtained through trade with distant peoples who possess unique dyeing techniques or access to rare pigment sources. The preservation of colored feathers requires special techniques that protect both their physical structure and their spiritual potency. Dyed plumes are stored in containers lined with aromatic woods that repel insects while maintaining the proper humidity levels, while the most precious specimens are wrapped in cotton cloth that has been blessed by priests and treated with protective charms. The knowledge of these preservation methods is closely guarded, for the loss of a single rare feather might delay an important ceremonial commission for months or even years.
The evening shadows lengthen as I enter the most sacred chamber of the featherworking quarter, where Master Tlacalayal prepares for the ritual purification that must precede his work on the divine headdress of Moctezuma himself. Here, in this sanctified space, where the boundaries between craft and ceremony dissolve completely, the creation of featherwork becomes an act of communion with the gods that requires spiritual preparation as elaborate as any religious observance. The chamber is filled with the smoke of burning copal, its sweet fragrance carrying prayers to the celestial realm while purifying the air that will surround the sacred work. Tlacalayal kneels before an altar dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, his weathered hands clasped in supplication as he recites the ancient prayers that have been spoken by featherworkers for countless generations. His voice, barely audible above the whisper of incense smoke, carries the weight of absolute devotion and the humility required of those who would touch the plumage of the gods.
The ritual of purification begins with a fast that lasts for 4 days, during which Tlacalayal consumes only water and ground maize, allowing his body to achieve the state of spiritual clarity necessary for handling the most sacred materials. During this period, he maintains constant vigil before the altar, sleeping only in brief intervals and spending his waking hours in meditation and prayer. The physical weakness that results from this fasting is considered essential, for it demonstrates the artisan's willingness to sacrifice his own comfort for the privilege of serving the divine. The cleansing of his hands follows rituals that have been refined over centuries of practice, each gesture carrying symbolic meaning that connects the physical act of purification to the spiritual transformation required for sacred work. Tlacalayal washes his hands in water that has been blessed by the high priests of the Templo Mayor, then anoints them with oils extracted from flowers that bloom only in the sacred gardens of the gods. The final step involves rubbing his palms with powdered jade, the precious green stone that embodies the life force of growing plants and the eternal renewal of creation. The selection of the first feather to be worked marks a moment of profound spiritual significance, for this choice will determine the spiritual character of the entire piece. Tlacalayal approaches the collection of quetzal plumes with the reverence of a priest approaching the most sacred relics, his movements slow and deliberate as he examines each feather for signs of divine favor. The chosen plume must be perfect, not only in its physical characteristics, but also in its spiritual purity, determined through divination rituals that reveal whether the feather carries the blessing of the gods.
The tools used in this sacred work are themselves objects of power that require their own purification rituals before they can be employed in the creation of divine objects. The bone needles are blessed with prayers to the eagle spirits whose bones provided the material, while the obsidian blades are consecrated through ceremonies that honor the volcanic forces that created the sacred glass. Even the cotton thread used to bind the feathers must be spun by virgins who have maintained ritual purity throughout the process, ensuring that every component of the work carries the spiritual force necessary for divine creation. The workspace itself undergoes transformation through elaborate consecration rituals that convert ordinary space into a temple where the gods can manifest their presence through human artistry. The floor is swept with brooms made from sacred grasses, then sprinkled with water from the holy springs that feed the great lake surrounding Tenochtitlan. Incense burners are placed at the 4 cardinal directions, their constant offerings of copal smoke creating a protective barrier that prevents malevolent spirits from interfering with the sacred work. The timing of the work follows astronomical calculations that ensure each stage of creation occurs during the most spiritually auspicious moments. The initial placement of feathers must begin at dawn, when the rising sun provides the divine energy necessary for starting new creation. Certain phases of the moon are considered too dangerous for working with the most sacred materials, while specific planetary alignments are required for the completion of objects destined for the most important ceremonies. The mental preparation required for this work involves meditation techniques that allow the artisan to achieve a state of consciousness where divine inspiration can flow freely through human hands. Tlacalayal spends hours in contemplation of the cosmic forces that govern the movement of birds across the sky, seeking to understand the spiritual essence of flight that he must capture in his earth-bound creation. This meditation is accompanied by the chanting of sacred formulas that align his consciousness with the rhythms of the universe. The physical demands of maintaining ritual purity throughout the creative process are extraordinary, requiring constant vigilance and self-discipline. Tlacalayal must avoid contact with anything that might contaminate his spiritual state, including certain foods, materials, and even people who have not undergone proper purification. His diet during the working period consists only of foods that have been blessed by priests, while his clothing is limited to garments woven from cotton that has been grown in sacred fields and prepared according to ritual specifications.
The emotional intensity of working under such conditions creates a heightened state of awareness that allows the artisan to perceive subtle qualities in the feathers that would be invisible under normal circumstances. Colors appear more vivid, textures become more distinct, and the spiritual essence of each plume reveals itself to consciousness that has been refined through ritual preparation. This enhanced perception is considered essential for creating works that truly embody divine presence, rather than merely representing it symbolically. The social isolation required during periods of sacred work creates a profound sense of responsibility and spiritual burden for the master artisan. Plakalel has voluntarily separated himself from normal human relationships, living in a state of perpetual ritual preparation that allows him to serve as a conduit for divine creativity. His family understands and supports this sacrifice, for they recognize that his work maintains the spiritual health of the entire empire by creating the sacred objects that ensure the gods' continued favor. The completion of each stage of the work is marked by specific ceremonies that acknowledge the divine assistance received and request continued blessing for the remaining tasks. Offerings of precious materials are made to the appropriate deities, while prayers of gratitude are recited to honor the spirits of the birds whose feathers have been incorporated into the sacred creation. These rituals serve not only to maintain proper spiritual relationships, but also to renew the artisan's connection to the divine forces that guide his work.
The influence of imperial fashion extends throughout Aztec society, with nobles and wealthy merchants commissioning featherwork that echoes the styles and motifs favored by the emperor, while remaining appropriately modest in scale and complexity. This creates a visual hierarchy that reinforces social distinctions while allowing the artistic innovations developed for imperial use to filter down through the ranks of society, enriching the overall aesthetic culture of the empire. The international impact of Aztec featherwork becomes apparent when foreign ambassadors and tribute bearers witness displays like this morning's ceremony. Their amazement and envy are clearly visible as they struggle to comprehend artistic achievements that surpass anything in their own cultures, while their reports to distant rulers help spread the fame of Aztec craftsmanship throughout Mesoamerica and beyond. This soft power projection through artistic excellence serves the empire's diplomatic interests as effectively as military might. The spiritual dimension of the emperor's regalia transforms him from a mere mortal ruler into a living embodiment of divine authority, his feathered costume serving as a bridge between the earthly and celestial realms. The gods themselves are believed to inhabit these sacred garments during important ceremonies, speaking through the emperor's voice and acting through his hands to maintain the cosmic order that ensures the continued prosperity of the empire and the favor of the heavens. The economic implications of the emperor's regalia are staggering, representing wealth equivalent to entire provinces of the empire. The quetzal feathers alone in his headdress are worth more than most nobles will see in their lifetimes, while the labor required to create such masterpieces represents years of work by the most skilled artisans in Mesoamerica. Yet this display of wealth serves purposes that go far beyond mere ostentation, for it demonstrates the divine favor that legitimizes Aztec rule and the cosmic order that places the emperor at the center of the universe. The psychological impact of Moctezuma's appearance on the assembled crowd is profound and immediate. Gasps of awe ripple through the plaza as people catch sight of the emperor's magnificent regalia, their eyes struggling to comprehend the beauty and complexity of what they are witnessing. Children point in wonder at the dancing lights that play across the feathered surfaces, while adults bow their heads in recognition of the divine presence that manifests itself through such extraordinary artistry. This display of wealth serves purposes that go far beyond mere ostentation, for it demonstrates the divine favor that legitimizes Aztec rule and the cosmic order that places the emperor at the center of the universe. The symbolic meanings embedded in every aspect of the emperor's costume speak to those who understand the visual language of Aztec culture. The predominance of green feathers connects him to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of wisdom and creation, while the gold ornaments link him to the sun and its life-giving power. The overall design creates a visual representation of the cosmic order, with the emperor serving as the earthly embodiment of divine authority and the focal point around which all creation revolves. The maintenance of such elaborate regalia requires a small army of specialists who dedicate their lives to preserving and caring for these precious objects. Each piece must be cleaned and inspected regularly, with damaged feathers replaced and loose elements secured before they can be lost. The storage of imperial featherwork follows strict protocols that protect the pieces from light, moisture, and insects, while maintaining the proper spiritual conditions necessary for objects of such sacred significance. The creation of new pieces for the imperial wardrobe follows schedules that align with the ceremonial calendar, ensuring that appropriate regalia is available for each of the major festivals that mark the passage of the year. The emperor's appearance at different ceremonies requires different combinations of colors and symbols, each outfit carefully designed to invoke the specific divine forces appropriate to the occasion. The planning and coordination required for this system represents a triumph of organization that rivals the empire's military and administrative achievements.
The influence of imperial fashion extends throughout Aztec society, with nobles and wealthy merchants commissioning featherwork that echoes the styles and motifs favored by the emperor, while remaining appropriately modest in scale and complexity. This creates a visual hierarchy that reinforces social distinctions while allowing the artistic innovations developed for imperial use to filter down through the ranks of society, enriching the overall aesthetic culture of the empire. The international impact of Aztec featherwork becomes apparent when foreign ambassadors and tribute bearers witness displays like this morning's ceremony. Their amazement and envy are clearly visible as they struggle to comprehend artistic achievements that surpass anything in their own cultures, while their reports to distant rulers help spread the fame of Aztec craftsmanship throughout Mesoamerica and beyond. This soft power projection through artistic excellence serves the empire's diplomatic interests as effectively as military might. The spiritual dimension of the emperor's regalia transforms him from a mere mortal ruler into a living embodiment of divine authority, his feathered costume serving as a bridge between the earthly and celestial realms. The gods themselves are believed to inhabit these sacred garments during important ceremonies, speaking through the emperor's voice and acting through his hands to maintain the cosmic order that ensures the continued prosperity of the empire and the favor of the heavens.
The sacred precinct of the Templo Mayor resonates with the whispered prayers of priests as I ascend the steep steps toward the shrine of Quetzalcoatl, where the most magnificent featherwork in all of Tenochtitlan adorns the image of the feathered serpent god. Here, in this holiest of spaces, the art of the Amanteca reaches its ultimate expression, creating objects that serve not merely as decoration, but as vessels through which divine presence manifests itself in the material world. The great statue of Quetzalcoatl rises before me like a vision from the celestial realm, its serpentine form covered entirely in feathers that seem to ripple and flow with each breath of wind that stirs through the temple chambers. The head of the god is crowned with a magnificent headdress of quetzal plumes that cascade down the statue's back like a waterfall of living emerald. each feather positioned with such precision that the overall effect creates the illusion of perpetual motion even in perfect stillness. The body of the serpent is covered with thousands of smaller feathers arranged in overlapping scales that catch and reflect light in ways that make the stone beneath seem to breathe with divine life. Hummingbird feathers create iridescent patches that shift from blue to green to gold as I move around the statue, while macaw plumes provide accents of brilliant red that pulse like the heartbeat of the god himself. The overall effect is so lifelike that I find myself expecting the great serpent to uncoil and take flight at any moment. The priests who tend this sacred image have dedicated their entire lives to maintaining the spiritual and physical integrity of the featherwork that adorns their god. Each morning begins with elaborate purification rituals that prepare them for the privilege of touching materials that bridge the gap between earth and heaven, while their days are spent in careful inspection and maintenance of every feather, ensuring that the divine presence remains properly housed within its earthly vessel. The replacement of damaged or faded feathers follows protocols that have been established through centuries of religious practice, with each new plume undergoing extensive blessing ceremonies before it can be incorporated into the sacred image. The priests who perform this work are themselves master feather workers, their skills honed through decades of training that combines technical expertise with profound spiritual understanding of the materials they handle and the divine forces they serve.
The seasonal ceremonies that honor Quetzalcoatl require the addition of special featherwork elements that are created specifically for each occasion and then carefully preserved for future use. During the spring festivals that celebrate the god's role in bringing renewal to the world, the statue is adorned with fresh green feathers that symbolize new growth and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The autumn ceremonies that honor his wisdom and knowledge feature additions of blue and white plumes that represent the clarity of divine understanding. The acoustic properties of the feathered surfaces create subtle sound effects that enhance the spiritual atmosphere of the temple. The soft rustling of thousands of feathers in the slightest breeze produces a whispered symphony that seems to carry the voice of the god himself, while the way the feathers absorb and reflect sound creates an otherworldly quality to the chants and prayers offered in the sacred space. These effects are not accidental, but represent careful planning by the artisans who understand the multisensory nature of divine presence. The symbolic complexity of the featherwork design incorporates layers of meaning that speak to different levels of spiritual understanding. The surface patterns visible to casual observers tell the basic stories of Quetzalcoatl's role in creation and his gifts to humanity, while deeper symbolic structures reveal more esoteric teachings about the nature of divine consciousness and the cosmic forces that govern existence. Master priests spend years learning to read these visual texts, their understanding deepening with each level of initiation they achieve. The materials used in the god's adornment represent tribute and offerings from across the empire and beyond, creating a physical manifestation of the unity that Quetzalcoatl brings to the diverse peoples under Aztec rule. Feathers from the tropical lowlands mingle with plumes from highland species, while exotic materials obtained through long-distance trade add their own spiritual power to the overall composition. This geographic diversity reflects the god's universal nature and his role as patron of merchants and travelers. The maintenance schedule for the divine featherwork follows astronomical calculations that align the care of the god's earthly form with celestial events that mark important moments in the cosmic calendar. Major renovations coincide with solar eclipses and planetary conjunctions, while routine maintenance is timed to occur during specific phases of the moon that are considered most favorable for working with sacred materials. This integration of artistic practice with astronomical observation reflects the sophisticated understanding of cosmic relationships that characterizes Aztec religious thought. The training of priests who will care for the sacred featherwork begins in childhood with selection processes that identify individuals with the spiritual sensitivity and manual dexterity required for such demanding work. These chosen few undergo years of preparation that includes not only technical instruction in featherworking techniques, but also intensive spiritual discipline designed to purify their consciousness and align their intentions with divine will. The final stages of their training involve direct apprenticeship to master priest artisans who pass down the most sacred knowledge through personal instruction and guided practice. The economic support required for maintaining the god's featherwork comes from dedicated tribute streams that ensure a constant supply of the finest materials available anywhere in Mesoamerica. Entire communities specialize in providing specific types of feathers for the temple's use, while master artisans throughout the empire consider it the highest honor to contribute their skills to the creation of elements that will adorn the divine image. This system creates a network of spiritual and economic relationships that strengthens the bonds between the capital and the provinces. The pilgrims who journey to Tenochtitlan from distant lands often cite their desire to witness the feathered glory of Quetzalcoatl as their primary motivation for undertaking such arduous travels. Their amazement and devotion upon seeing the god's magnificent adornment reinforces their faith while spreading the reputation of Aztec artistic achievement throughout Mesoamerica. Many return to their homes carrying small featherwork objects blessed by contact with the sacred image, creating a network of spiritual influence that extends the god's presence far beyond the boundaries of the temple itself. The preservation of the techniques and knowledge required for maintaining divine featherwork represents one of the most important responsibilities of the priestly hierarchy, for the loss of this expertise would threaten the very foundation of the empire's relationship with the gods.
The war drums echo across the great plaza as I witness the transformation of ordinary men into divine warriors through the sacred art of featherwork. Their bodies adorned with the plumage of eagles and jaguars that grants them the spiritual power of these mighty predators. Here, in the courtyard of the warrior school, young nobles undergo the final stages of their initiation, receiving the feathered regalia that will mark their passage from human to something approaching the divine. The eagle warrior who stands before me seems to have transcended his mortal form entirely, his magnificent costume creating the illusion that a great bird of prey has taken human shape to walk among men. The helmet that covers his head is a masterwork of featherworking art, crafted to resemble the head of an eagle with such precision that the fierce eyes seem to follow my movement, while the curved beak appears ready to tear flesh from bone. Golden feathers cascade from the helmet's crest, catching the morning light and sending ripples of fire across the warrior's shoulders. The bodysuit that encases the warrior from neck to ankles represents months of painstaking labor by Master Amanteca, who specialize in military regalia. Thousands of eagle feathers have been arranged to create the illusion of natural plumage, with each feather positioned to follow the contours of the human form, while maintaining the visual integrity of the bird's natural patterns. The wings that extend from the warrior's arms are functional as well as decorative, their movement creating dramatic visual effects that enhance the psychological impact of his presence on the battlefield. The spiritual preparation required for wearing such sacred regalia involves rituals that connect the warrior to the eagle spirit, whose form he has assumed. Before donning the costume, he must undergo purification ceremonies that cleanse his body and soul,
of any contamination that might interfere with the spiritual transformation about to take place. Fasting, prayer, and meditation prepare his consciousness to receive the eagle's fierce courage and predatory instincts, while offerings of precious materials honor the bird spirits whose power he seeks to channel. The creation of warrior costumes follows different principles than those governing ceremonial or religious featherwork, for these garments must combine spiritual power with practical functionality. The feathers must be attached in ways that allow for the violent movement of combat while maintaining their visual impact and symbolic meaning. Special techniques have been developed for reinforcing vulnerable areas without compromising the costume's appearance, while the overall design must balance protection with the mobility required for effective fighting.
The jaguar warriors present an equally impressive sight, their spotted costumes creating the illusion that great cats have emerged from the jungle to prowl the streets of Tenochtitlan. The featherwork that creates their distinctive markings requires extraordinary skill, for the natural randomness of jaguar spots must be recreated through careful arrangement of feathers in patterns that appear natural while following the geometric principles that govern all Aztec art. The psychological effect of these costumes on enemies, who have never seen such magnificent predators, is devastating, often causing panic before the actual fighting begins. The hierarchy within the warrior orders is reflected in the complexity and quality of their feathered regalia, with veteran fighters earning the right to wear increasingly elaborate costumes that mark their achievements and spiritual advancement. Young warriors begin with simple feathered elements that gradually expand as they prove themselves in battle, while the most accomplished fighters wear complete animal transformations that represent the culmination of both military and spiritual development. The maintenance of warrior costumes requires specialized knowledge that combines featherworking techniques with understanding of the unique stresses imposed by combat use. Battle damage must be repaired quickly and effectively, often under field conditions that make delicate work extremely challenging. Master artisans who specialize in military featherwork often accompany major expeditions, their skills essential for maintaining the spiritual and psychological advantages that properly adorned warriors provide to Aztec forces. The symbolic meanings embedded in warrior costumes extend beyond simple animal identification to encompass complex relationships between human consciousness and natural forces. The eagle represents the power of the sky and the ability to see the battlefield from divine perspective, while the jaguar embodies the stealth and ferocity of the jungle predator. Warriors who wear these costumes are believed to gain access to the animal's supernatural abilities, becoming more than human through their connection to these powerful spirits. The training required to fight effectively while wearing elaborate feathered costumes involves years of practice that teaches warriors to move with grace and power despite the bulk and complexity of their regalia. The costumes become extensions of their bodies, their movements choreographed to take advantage of the visual and psychological effects created by flowing feathers and dramatic silhouettes. Master warriors can use their costumes as weapons themselves, the sudden spread of feathered wings creating moments of confusion that provide tactical advantages in close combat. The economic investment represented by warrior costumes reflects the high value placed on military excellence in Aztec society. The materials alone for a complete eagle or jaguar costume cost more than most families earn in several years, while the labor required for their creation represents the work of master artisans, whose skills are among the most highly valued in the empire. This investment is justified by the psychological and spiritual advantages that properly equipped warriors provide, their presence on the battlefield often determining the outcome of entire campaigns. The international reputation of Aztec warrior costumes spreads fear and admiration throughout Mesoamerica, with enemy forces often demoralized by the mere sight of eagle and jaguar warriors advancing across the battlefield. The artistic achievement represented by these costumes becomes a form of psychological warfare that extends Aztec influence far beyond the reach of their armies, creating legends that enhance the empire's reputation for invincibility and divine favor. The ceremonial use of warrior costumes extends beyond actual combat to include the elaborate festivals and parades that celebrate military victories and honor the gods of war. During these events, the costumes serve as living representations of the animal spirits that guide Aztec forces, their presence ensuring continued divine support for the empire's military endeavors. The sight of hundreds of eagle and jaguar warriors moving in perfect formation creates spectacles that reinforce the cosmic order and demonstrate the harmony between human will and natural forces. The preservation of warrior costume traditions ensures that the spiritual knowledge and technical skills required for their creation will survive to serve future generations of fighters, maintaining the connection between Aztec military power and the divine forces that grant victory to those who honor the gods through magnificent displays of artistic achievement and spiritual devotion.
The morning mist rises from the great lake as strange vessels appear on the horizon, carrying men whose pale skin and metal armor gleam like silver in the dawn light. I stand among the crowd of Aztec nobles and commoners who have gathered at the water's edge to witness the arrival of these mysterious strangers, their eyes wide with wonder and growing unease, as they behold sights that challenge everything they understand about the world and its inhabitants. Hernan Cortez steps from his boat onto the stone causeway, his weathered face betraying amazement as his gaze falls upon the feathered splendor of the Aztec delegation that has come to greet him. The Spanish conquistador, accustomed to the rough wool and leather of European clothing, finds himself confronted by an artistic achievement that surpasses anything in his experience. The ambassador who approaches him wears a cape of hummingbird feathers that shifts through every color of the rainbow with each movement, creating visual effects that seem to defy the laws of nature. The interpreter who accompanies Cortez struggles to find Spanish words adequate to describe what they are witnessing, for European languages contain no vocabulary for the sophisticated featherworking techniques that transform simple bird plumes into objects of transcendent beauty. The Spanish soldiers, their eyes trained to recognize gold and silver as the only true measures of wealth, initially dismissed the featherwork as mere decoration, failing to comprehend that these objects represent value far exceeding their weight in precious metals. Their crude attempts to assess the worth of Aztec gifts focus on the small amounts of gold thread and ornamental discs incorporated into the designs, completely missing the true treasure represented by the artistic achievement and spiritual significance of the featherwork itself.
The cultural collision represented by this first encounter reveals the vast gulf between European and Aztec concepts of value, beauty, and artistic achievement. Where the Spanish see only exotic curiosities suitable for display in royal cabinets of wonders, the Aztecs have created objects that embody their deepest spiritual beliefs and represent the culmination of centuries of artistic development. The failure of communication goes beyond mere language barriers to encompass fundamentally different ways of understanding the relationship between material objects and spiritual meaning. The documentation of Aztec featherwork by Spanish chroniclers provides invaluable records of artistic techniques and cultural practices that would otherwise be lost to history. Yet these accounts are filtered through European perspectives that often misinterpret or oversimplify the complex meanings embedded in the objects they describe. The writers struggle to convey the visual impact of featherwork to readers who have never seen such artistry, their descriptions falling far short of capturing the reality of objects that seem to glow with inner light. The gradual destruction of Aztec featherwork begins almost immediately with the Spanish conquest, as conquistadors and colonists fail to understand the proper care required for such delicate objects. Feathered garments and ornaments are damaged through improper handling,
exposed to European climates that cause rapid deterioration, or simply discarded as worthless by men whose concept of value is limited to materials that can be melted down and converted to coin. The survival of a few exceptional pieces in European collections represents a miracle of preservation that allows modern observers to glimpse the artistic heights achieved by Aztec featherworkers. The famous headdress, now housed in Vienna's Weltmuseum, whether or not it actually belonged to Moctezuma, stands as testimony to the extraordinary skill and spiritual vision of the Amanteca, who created objects of beauty that transcend cultural boundaries and speak to universal human aspirations toward the divine. The Spanish attempts to adapt Aztec featherworking techniques to European artistic traditions result in hybrid creations that combine indigenous skills with Christian imagery, producing objects that reflect the complex cultural negotiations taking place during the early colonial period. Indigenous artisans, forced to abandon their traditional religious subjects, channel their expertise into creating feathered images of saints and biblical scenes that satisfy their new masters while preserving something of their ancestral knowledge. The sources describe these moments of cultural and artistic collision, though sometimes unintentionally, showcasing the interplay between different traditions and techniques.
The economic disruption caused by the conquest devastates the complex trade networks that supplied feathers to Tenochtitlan's workshops, as traditional tribute systems collapse and the specialized communities that provided exotic plumes are scattered or destroyed. The loss of these supply chains makes it impossible to maintain the great featherwork collections of the temples and palaces, leading to the gradual deterioration of artistic treasures that had taken generations to create. The psychological impact of witnessing the destruction of their artistic heritage weighs heavily on surviving Aztec artisans, who watch helplessly as objects they consider sacred are treated as mere curiosities or discarded entirely. The spiritual significance of featherwork, so central to Aztec religious practice, becomes incomprehensible to European minds that separate art from worship and view material objects as having value independent of their spiritual meaning. The documentation efforts of a few sympathetic Spanish observers, particularly the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún, preserve crucial information about featherworking techniques and cultural practices that would otherwise vanish completely. These records, compiled with the help of indigenous informants who remember the old ways, provide modern scholars with insights into the sophisticated artistic and spiritual traditions that flourished in pre-conquest Tenochtitlan. The legacy of this cultural encounter extends far beyond the immediate destruction of the conquest to influence European concepts of artistic achievement and cultural value. The featherwork that survives in European collections challenges Renaissance assumptions about the relationship between civilization and artistic sophistication, forcing observers to acknowledge that peoples they considered primitive had achieved levels of artistic excellence that rivaled or exceeded anything produced in the Old World.
The smoke of burning temples drifts across the ruins of Tenochtitlan as I walk through the devastated workshops of Amantla, where scattered feathers lie like fallen stars among the rubble of a civilization that once touched the heavens through its art. The silence here is profound and heartbreaking, broken only by the whisper of wind through broken walls and the soft rustle of precious plumes that will never again be transformed into objects of divine beauty by the skilled hands of Master Amanteca. In the corner of what was once Itzel's workshop, I discover a small cache of quetzal feathers that somehow escaped the destruction, their emerald brilliance undimmed despite the chaos that has swept away the world they once adorned. These survivors seem to glow with their own inner light, as if the spirits of the birds that provided them refused to accept the death of the artistic tradition that gave their sacrifice meaning. I handle them with the reverence they deserve, knowing that I may be among the last to witness their beauty before time and neglect claim them forever. The few Amanteca who survived the conquest wander through the ruins like ghosts, their hands empty of the tools and materials that once defined their existence. Their knowledge, accumulated over generations of careful study and spiritual practice, has become suddenly worthless in a world that no longer values the subtle arts of featherworking. Some attempt to adapt their skills to Spanish demands, creating crude imitations of their former masterpieces for conquistadors who appreciate only the gold thread and precious stones, while remaining blind to the true artistry of the featherwork itself. The great collections that once adorned the temples and palaces of Tenochtitlan have been scattered to the winds, their sacred objects treated as mere curiosities by men who cannot comprehend the spiritual significance of what they are destroying. Feathered images of gods are stripped of their precious materials and discarded, while ceremonial costumes that took years to create are torn apart for their gold ornaments, the feathers themselves considered worthless and left to rot in the tropical humidity. The libraries of featherwork samples that documented centuries of artistic development have been lost forever. Their carefully preserved examples of color combinations and technical innovations destroyed by men who see no value in preserving the knowledge of conquered peoples. The master patterns that guided the creation of the most complex designs exist now only in the memories of aging artisans, and with each death, irreplaceable knowledge vanishes from the world like smoke dissipating in the wind.
The trade networks that once brought exotic feathers from across Mesoamerica have collapsed entirely. Their carefully maintained relationships between merchants and suppliers severed by the chaos of conquest and the imposition of new economic systems that have no place for the specialized commerce in luxury materials. The communities that once devoted their entire existence to providing specific types of feathers for the workshops of Tenochtitlan have been scattered or enslaved, their traditional knowledge lost along with their freedom. The spiritual dimension of featherworking, so central to its practice and meaning, has been declared heretical by Spanish priests who see only pagan superstition in the sacred rituals that once accompanied the creation of divine objects. The Amantica are forbidden to perform the purification ceremonies that prepared them for working with sacred materials, while the blessing of feathers and tools is condemned as devil worship by men who cannot distinguish between spiritual reverence and demonic practice. The few pieces of Aztec featherwork that survive in European collections represent a tiny fraction of the artistic treasures that once filled the temples and palaces of Tenochtitlan. These lonely survivors, displayed in cabinets of curiosities far from their homeland, serve as mute testimony to the sophistication and beauty of a civilization that has been reduced to footnotes in the histories written by its conquerors. Their presence in foreign museums raises questions about cultural ownership and the responsibility of preserving artistic heritage that transcends national boundaries. The attempts by Spanish colonial authorities to adapt indigenous featherworking skills to Christian purposes result in hybrid creations that preserve some technical knowledge while completely abandoning the spiritual and cultural contexts that gave the art its meaning. Indigenous artisans, forced to create feathered images of saints and biblical scenes, struggle to maintain their ancestral skills while serving masters who view their work as mere decoration rather than sacred art. The gradual loss of technical knowledge accelerates as the master Amantica age and die without being able to pass their skills to new generations of apprentices. The complex understanding of feather properties, color relations, and spiritual significance that took lifetimes to acquire disappears with each death, leaving behind only fragmentary knowledge that cannot support the continuation of the tradition in its full complexity and sophistication.
The environmental destruction that accompanies Spanish colonization eliminates many of the bird species whose feathers were essential to Aztec featherworking, as forests are cleared for agriculture and mining operations disrupt the delicate ecosystems that supported the diverse avian populations of Mesoamerica. The Quetzal birds that provided the most sacred plumes retreat deeper into the mountains, their numbers declining as their habitat shrinks, and their traditional protection under Aztec law is replaced by Spanish indifference to their survival. The cultural memory of featherworking persists in the oral traditions of indigenous communities, where stories of the great Amanteca and their magnificent creations are passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. These narratives preserve something of the wonder and reverence that once surrounded the art, even as the physical objects and technical knowledge disappear from the world. The stories speak of feathers that glowed like captured sunlight and costumes that transformed men into gods, keeping alive the memory of achievements that once seemed to bridge the gap between earth and heaven. The modern efforts to revive traditional featherworking techniques face enormous challenges, as the knowledge base required for authentic recreation has been largely lost, and the materials needed for traditional practice are no longer available in sufficient quantities. Contemporary artisans who attempt to recreate Aztec featherwork must work from fragmentary evidence and educated guesswork, their efforts producing approximations rather than true continuations of the ancient tradition. The legacy of Aztec featherworking lives on in the influence it has had on subsequent artistic traditions and in the inspiration it continues to provide to artists who seek to understand the relationship between spiritual vision and material creation. The few surviving examples serve as windows into a world where art and religion were inseparable, where human creativity reached toward the divine through the transformation of natural materials into objects of transcendent beauty.
The evening mist rises from the lake where Tenochtitlan once stood, and I find myself walking through a landscape of memory where the ghosts of ancient artisans still move their hands in the eternal rhythms of creation. Here, in this twilight realm between what was and what might have been, the knowledge of the Amanteca floats like feathers on the wind, waiting for hearts pure enough to receive the sacred teachings that once transformed simple plumes into bridges between earth and sky. The whispers of the master feather workers echo across the centuries, their voices carrying the secrets of color and light that made their art a form of prayer made visible. I listen carefully to these ethereal teachings, understanding that the true legacy of Aztec featherworking lies not in the physical objects that have survived, but in the spiritual principles that guided their creation. The Amanteca knew that they were not merely arranging decorative materials, but participating in the divine act of creation itself, their hands serving as instruments through which the gods could manifest beauty in the material world. The techniques they developed for working with feathers represent only the surface of a much deeper understanding about the relationship between human consciousness and natural forces. Each feather carried within its structure the essence of flight, the freedom of the sky, and the connection between terrestrial and celestial realms. The master Amanteca learned to read these spiritual signatures, selecting and arranging their materials according to principles that went far beyond mere aesthetic considerations to encompass the metaphysical properties of the objects they were creating. The color harmonies achieved through careful feather selection reflected the Aztec understanding of cosmic order, with each hue carrying specific meanings that connected earthly materials to divine forces. The mathematical precision required for creating effective visual effects mirrored the geometric principles that governed the movement of celestial bodies, ensuring that the finished works would resonate with the fundamental frequencies of creation itself.
This integration of artistic practice with astronomical knowledge created objects that functioned as both beautiful decorations and functional tools for channeling divine energy. The spiritual preparation required for working with the most sacred materials involved more than ritual purification. It demanded a complete transformation of consciousness that allowed the artisan to perceive the hidden connections between all things. The master Amanteca understood that their craft was ultimately about relationship between human creativity and divine inspiration, between individual skill and cosmic order, between the temporary beauty of earthly objects and the eternal splendor of the heavens.
The social organization of the featherworking community reflected these spiritual principles, with knowledge flowing from master to apprentice through relationships based on trust, reverence, and mutual dedication to the sacred nature of the work. The workshops of Amantla functioned as temples where the boundaries between art and worship dissolved completely, creating environments where divine presence could manifest through human hands guided by generations of accumulated wisdom. The economic systems that supported featherworking created networks of relationship that extended throughout the empire and beyond, connecting the workshops of Tenochtitlan to communities thousands of miles away through bonds of mutual dependence and shared purpose. The tribute systems that brought exotic feathers to the capital were more than mere commercial arrangements. They were expressions of the cosmic order that placed the emperor at the center of a universe where all creation contributed to the maintenance of divine harmony. The destruction of this artistic tradition represents more than the loss of beautiful objects. It marks the severing of connections between human consciousness and natural forces that had been maintained for centuries through the practice of sacred art. The knowledge that died with the last master Amanteca included understanding of relationships between color and consciousness, between geometric patterns and cosmic forces, between material beauty and spiritual truth that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Yet something of this knowledge persists in the collective memory of humanity, surfacing in moments of artistic inspiration when contemporary creators touch the same sources of beauty that guided the ancient Amanteca. The principles that governed Aztec featherworking, the integration of technical skill with spiritual vision, the understanding of art as a form of prayer, the recognition that beauty serves purposes beyond mere decoration, continue to influence artists who seek to create works that transcend the merely aesthetic to touch something eternal and transformative. The few surviving examples of Aztec featherwork serve as seeds of possibility, containing within their faded beauty the potential for new growth and understanding. Each preserved feather carries genetic information that could theoretically be used to recreate the birds that provided it, while the techniques visible in the construction of surviving pieces offer clues to the methods used by their creators. Modern technology provides tools that the ancient artisans could never have imagined. Yet the fundamental challenge remains the same: how to transform material substances into expressions of spiritual truth.
The revival of interest in traditional featherworking techniques reflects a growing recognition that indigenous artistic traditions contain knowledge that remains relevant to contemporary concerns about the relationship between human creativity and environmental stewardship. The Aztec understanding of feathers as gifts from the sky that must be received with reverence and used with wisdom offers insights into sustainable practices that honor both the sources of materials and the purposes for which they are employed. The meditation practices that prepared the Amanteca for their sacred work provide models for contemporary artists seeking to develop the spiritual sensitivity required for creating objects that serve purposes beyond mere decoration.
The integration of fasting, prayer, and contemplation with technical training created artisans whose consciousness was refined to perceive subtle qualities in materials and relationships that remain invisible to ordinary perception. As the mist thickens around me and the voices of the ancient masters fade into silence, I understand that the true legacy of Aztec featherworking lies not in any attempt to recreate the past, but in the inspiration it provides for future generations of artists who seek to touch the divine through their work. The feathers that once adorned the gods of Tenochtitlan have returned to dust, but the vision that guided their arrangement continues to dance on the wind, awaiting hands pure enough and hearts open enough to receive the eternal teachings that transform craft into prayer and beauty into a bridge between worlds. The knowledge sleeps, but does not die, carried forward in the dreams of those who understand that art, at its highest expression, serves not the ego of the creator, but the divine forces that seek to manifest beauty and meaning in a world that hungers for both.
The stars emerge one final time above the phantom lake where Tenochtitlan once floated like a dream made manifest, and I feel the gentle touch of invisible feathers brushing against my consciousness as the spirits of the ancient Amanteca whisper their final blessings. The knowledge they carried in their skilled hands has not vanished, but transformed, becoming part of the eternal wind that carries beauty across all boundaries of time and space. In the growing darkness, I see flashes of emerald and gold dancing at the edges of vision, not memories, but living presences that continue to weave patterns of meaning through the fabric of existence. The Quetzal feathers that once adorned the gods have become fragments of light scattered across the night sky, each star a reminder that true artistry transcends the physical materials from which it springs. The workshops of Amantla exist now in a realm beyond destruction, where master craftsmen continue their sacred work with materials made of starlight and intention. Their hands move in the eternal rhythms of creation, selecting and arranging elements of pure beauty that will manifest in the dreams of those who seek to touch the divine through their own creative endeavors. The whispered teachings of the featherworkers blend with the sound of wind through reeds, carrying forward the understanding that every act of creation is an act of prayer, every arrangement of color and form a conversation with forces greater than ourselves. The techniques may be lost, but the spirit that animated them flows onward like an underground river, surfacing wherever human hands reach toward transcendence through the transformation of humble materials into objects of wonder. As sleep approaches, I feel myself wrapped in a cloak woven from the dreams of ancient artisans, each thread a memory of beauty that once graced the temples and palaces of a civilization that understood art as a bridge between worlds. The feathers rustle softly in the wind of forgetting, yet their essence remains, waiting to inspire new generations of creators who will discover their own ways to capture fragments of heaven in earthly form. Good night, keeper of ancient beauty. May your dreams be adorned with feathers of impossible colors, and may you wake with hands that remember the sacred touch of those who transformed the gifts of sky into prayers visible to gods and mortals alike.